let's move on to the men's Ashes. And like I mentioned at the start of this recording, always, the biggest event of the cricketing calendar when we have the Ashes. Um, but this build up to the Ashes, we have England playing limited over international to New Zealand and not doing a great job at it, while Australia is playing India, the same, playing T20s and ODI internationals. We don't really seem to have the concept of tour games anymore. So, how are you guys feeling about, the build up for both teams towards this Ashes?
I think the lack of tour games is just the way of modern cricket now. There's just so much cricket in the schedule, and so many of the players play more than one format. The days of an Ashes tour lasting kind of 3 months with games against the States and Prime Minister's 11s and all sorts of
Yeah, I remember those.
the other teams. I remember them too, and I think they're just over just because of the amount of cricket in the calendar. And England are adamant that the lack of warm-ups. I think they've got one game against the Lions. They're adamant that won't hurt them. And to be fair, they do have a decent record in the first game of an away series. But yeah, the New Zealand ODIs have been obviously hugely disappointing from an England point of view. Not surprising, but disappointing. New Zealand have got an amazing home record. So this morning they've won more than 90% of their home games in ODIs since 2019, top of the table for that. And England have been a poor ODI team for ages now. My son Freddie actually said to me this morning that England's test team would be better at ODIs than their ODI team, and I think that's probably true.
Worth
Um,
trying.
they, they just haven't got the hang of the tempo and the need to play
Right.
sensibly early on, especially now there's a new ball from each end. I think they just haven't really got the hang of it. Like, obviously, I would have preferred us to win, but I'm trying desperately not to read too much into it because it's just such a different format. I'm taking the positives out. Brooks 100 was outstanding. Archer and Cast looked like they were in good rhythm. Um,
Right.
but yeah, that's about it. And I think I'd like to mention Jacob Bethel will be kicking himself because they've kind of paved the way for him to make his way into the test team by taking the vice captaincy off Pope. So the door was open, and then these three close to zero scores in New Zealand. Just kind of he's hardly forcing his way through that open door. So it'd be really interesting to see whether Pope's at three or Bethel when it comes to Perth.
Yeah, I will say about the tour games, I feel like India built their success overseas on that. And when I say that is obviously this is maybe it's a little bit pre-COVID or just after COVID where India would always have an A team touring just before the main tour. And that way, if there were injuries, they had somebody come in. Mohammad Siraj, of course, is a known product of that A system where he played a lot of games and picked up a lot of wickets before getting picked for the senior team. And he's not the only one. There's many others. So I definitely thought the tour games added something. But I mean, I will say that sometimes these countries, the host countries, do have really ordinary oppositions or have pitches
Right.
which are not great quality. So then those tour games don't really matter as much. So I do see why England would be wouldn't be would have cynicism towards these tour games. But yeah, it is a little bit weird because I expected them to at least play maybe some 3-day games, something like that. But yeah, looks like they're directly going into it. Um, I
England
think
used to
other than
lose most of the tour games and then go
that,
into the first test absolutely mentally shot because they just lost to you know, B
Maybe
team
that's
from
why they
New
don't want
South
to do it
Wales.
anymore.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think the other interesting part of the build-up is just like the injuries. There's been plenty of injuries. I know like Archer is now looking like he's really fit, but on Australia's side, there's quite a few injuries. Of course, Pat Cummins is out of the first test, but also Cameron Green is still not 100%. So there's quite a few injuries that are happening. So again, like I feel like in the past, you would have the Ashes and the teams would be really preparing their key players to not play too much cricket, but that's obviously not the thing anymore. There's just too much cricket from franchise cricket to ODIs to T20s. that you can only restrict their game time as so much.
I think the advent of T20s and franchise cricket pretty much everywhere now, while it probably affects, fitness or leads to injury concerns for players ahead of major series like these, uh, on the other hand, they still offer familiarity of conditions. So even without tour games, since a lot of these players, English players come to Australia to play the BBL, and some of the Aussies go and play the Blast like in England. So there's always familiarity that I feel the tour games are not as critical for kind of getting a feel of the conditions prior to like, major series. Um, but in this regard, we've talked about, or I don't know if we really talked about it, but England haven't won an Ashes in Australia since 2011, right? And given the importance of Ashes, like even, I especially feel this about England, Ben, and you can feel free to defend if you don't agree with me. But it feels like whenever any team plays England, it's always put in the context of the Ashes, right? Like even if it's India or New Zealand, let's say they're touring England, or if a player is selected, it's always framed like, oh, this will be good. It's a good opportunity to test this player ahead of the Ashes. So, given the importance given to Ashes in England, what do you make of that record where they haven't won an Ashes in Australia for the longest time? And how do you feel about, all the preparation and everything that has led up to the current one?
I think it's a very difficult place to go and win test matches, and that's just shown by, yeah, we haven't won since 2010, 11, and I think the last time was so long ago that I think I was five the last time we won, five or six, and it was 80, 86, 87. Um, I think it's I think it's true that England have been planning for this series ever since Stoke and McCullum took over. Um, and yeah, they've kind of wanted to take particularly the fast bowlers. I think they've been obsessed with taking a kind of this battery of quick men on tour, and they've that's come together to a certain extent. I think Bashir's selection is one that was kind of overseas Ashes based. I think that high release point that they keep talking about is based, the reason that they like that is because they think it will be useful in Australia. I think to some extent, Crawley's continuing selection is because they think he'll go well in Australia on kind of faster, bouncier wickets with faster bowling. So I think they have been preparing for it ever since Bazball started.
Yeah.
Um, whether that will come off or not, or whether it will just be yet another embarrassing failure, who knows? But I do think that the plan has come together in terms of the group of players they're taking with them, and
Yeah.
the plan probably wasn't lose three ODIs in New Zealand, but um, I think there's more optimism over how the prep's gone than for many years before. It's normally the case that England are in total disarray. They don't know what their best 11 is. They don't know, they're picking people out of county cricket with 30 averages because there's no one good in the test team. They've racked with injuries, and this time does seem to be more settled, and I think there's more optimism now.
You know who they could turn to for advice? There's a team that's won two series in Australia since England last won an Ashes in Australia. Um, do you know who I'm talking about, Ben?
I don't.
Well, India have won two series down
India have
under
won twice, have they?
since the last time England won. In fact, I think that was their first series win as
Yeah,
well when they did win in the last few years. Of course, we're just choosing to forget the most recent one.
There was
But
one of them was in 2020 or 2021 when Rishabh Pant made that
yeah.
amazing
yes,
innings in the chase.
yes,
Yeah.
yep, that's
2018 was the first one. So they won in 2018-19 where they didn't have Smith and Warner, and then they won again in 2020. So two back-to-back wins.
Well,
So
hopefully they asked them for some tips over the summer.
I was going to say get Ravi Shastri as a consultant for the tour, and you're all set.
From Virat Kohli's MCG 6 against Pakistan to Bumrah's stump-destroying Yorker to Ollie Pope. Incredible things happen on the cricket ground. We also get iconic lines off it, like Siraj saying, "I only believe in Jassie Bye." There are so many incredible moments that cricket fans just never forget. And now you can wear them on your chest. Free Hit Gear has launched a line of amazing t-shirts and hoodie designs. Passionate fans in India can order through their website, freehitgear.com, while fans abroad can use Free Hit Gear on the Etsy store to have items delivered to them. Order now with the code GOODAREAS, or one word, to get a limited time 15% discount, and you can wear a t-shirt like this one right here.
Okay, but a lot of this also is dependent on the opposition that England is going to come up against. And as Mike mentioned earlier, Pat Cummins is out of the first test. The Australian batters are also not necessarily in the greatest of form. So, Mike, what do you think about the Australian team as they are positioned to start the first test? Obviously, Steve Smith is going to take over the reins of the team. But in terms of team composition, obviously they haven't selected the squads yet. But based on what you've been following, what do you think about the way they're shaping up?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cummins obviously is a big miss, just the quality he is. But Scott Boland is a quality replacement. Steve Smith is a great captain. So from that first test itself, I don't know if I want to read too much into that. But I will say that in general, the batting form, Usman Khwaja has not been in the best form. They've been, ever since, Warner retired, they've been struggling to find that opening partner. They've gone with some, really odd picks with Sam Constas, and it's worked one off and things like that. But most likely, it sounds like Matt Renshaw is on the top of that list right now. I'm not sure if he actually ends up opening in the Ashes at Perth in the first test, but yeah, that definitely has been a concern. I think even in general, Marnus Labuschagne was, such a great was in a great form for a couple of years, has had a big dip, so he was in and out of the squad. Um, I do think like they will rely very, very heavily on, of course, Steve Smith, but also Travis Head, who has been in excellent form with the bat. So they'll definitely have to rely on those two. Um, they've talked about with injuries to Cameron Green, they've talked about bringing back Mitch Marsh, who, I mean, I don't necessarily rate him really highly as a test player, but he does have the tendency to come up with one-off innings in Australian conditions where he does well. Webster is a fantastic all-rounder, clearly very, very good with the bat, has a great first-class record. So they do have the batting. I just feel their top order is not at the, it's probably past their peak is probably the best way to put it. And
Right.
so that I think and will give England hope, because if you look at just the bowling attacks, and I'm assuming Pat Cummins gets fit and is playing second test onwards. If you just look at the bowling attacks, there's little doubt that the Australian bowling attack is better than the English bowling attack, which is a lot more inexperienced. But because there's a lot more holes in the batting on the Australian side, that really makes this contest a lot more even. At least that's my reading of it.
Do you think they might
Well,
open with Labuschagne?
Yeah, they've talked about that. I mean, I know Smith has tried to open as well. Um, I don't know. I feel like Matt Renshaw has been in great form, even in I didn't watch the T20s, but in the one day series against India recently, he, scored his debut 50, and he looked like he was, just hitting the ball right beautifully right from ball one. So I would back somebody who's in such great form rather than try somebody, in a different position when
Hmm.
they're already struggling. At least that's my thought, but obviously the selectors probably know better, and they've probably had conversations with Renshaw and others.
My my thinking is that they might, given Green is slightly injured and might not be able to bowl all that much, I think they might want the insurance of having both Green and Webster in the side, in
Yeah.
which case, because then it kind of reduces the pressure on Stark, Hazelwood, Boland, which would mean then Green at 3 and Webster at 6, I would have thought, which then means that Marnus probably opens.
Yeah, yeah, it did sound like they were thinking along those lines. I think Australia has been hurt by playing four bowlers. I think the 2020 win when India won, of course, it was a crazy fourth or fifth test, but more than that, it was also a case of four Australian bowlers just carrying the whole series and being tired by the end of it. So they definitely have been more circumspect about adding that all-rounder option. So I do see them thinking of playing both, or maybe even bringing in Mitch Marsh if, let's say, Cameron Green is still, struggling with the bat. So I do think it's a possibility, but yeah, at least in my mind, I would rather play the informed batter, give him the best chance of succeeding. But yeah, we'll see how they go about that.
Can certainly
Hey,
see
Marnus can
having
bowl
them
too,
three or four
you know.
down for not very many a few times, but then it's whether they can get through Steve Smith and Travis Head.
Right.
You
Benny, you were
know,
saying something?
I was saying Marnus can bowl a little bit too and get some cheap wickets with his hideous action. Um, I really hope they persist with Sam Constance for a while. And not just because, he was kind of like the breakout star when he debuted. I know he didn't have a great series against West Indies, and I think that's why a lot of people are like, maybe we rushed in. Um, but given the fact that Usman Khawaja probably will be playing his last Ashes here, um, and you have Smith, Marnus, Travis had to follow, why not give him another run, like, or give him an extended run, essentially, because he's an exciting player and he, at least from his domestic performances, he still is scoring the runs, and I think it's worth giving him a shot. He's an exciting batter to watch, and I hope Australia persists with him.
As an
Um,
England fan, so do I.
well, I was gonna say, well, that's a great segue because I was gonna ask you, Ben, about, you know, sure, you're looking at the English team composition and all of that, but as a fan, when you're looking at, Australia and their injury struggles or the form struggles of their batters, how are you feeling about England's chances?
It's dangerous to ever say that you're confident about the
Yeah,
Ashes, particularly in Australia. I I think it makes a refreshing change that the selection debates are on the Australian side and not the English side. Um, I I think we've got a good chance. Like I said earlier, I think I can see us having them three or four down for not many a few times
yeah.
in the series. It's just whether we can push through that middle order. And of course, without Cummins, the tail's longer as well. I think, Boland is obviously an admirable replacement with the ball. He's not as good as Cummins, but he's very good. But he does
Yeah.
lengthen that tail quite considerably. You'd have Stark being a place too high at 8, and then three players who could arguably all bat 11. So I think it's just kind of get through that middle order, get through the top order, and then
Well,
the middle order is going to be crucial, and then hopefully we can start mopping up the tail a bit more effectively and bowl them out for some low scores.
Well, given Boland's bowling average, I feel like he makes up for his lack of batting talent, just taking wickets for next to nothing.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. I do wonder whether I don't think England will be scared of him because they just took him apart in England. I get that the conditions are different. I
mhm,
get that he took 6 for 7 at the MCG. I get that his average in Australia is like 12 or something, but I
yeah,
just don't think England will be intimidated by him in the same way that, Cummins is exceptional and also exceptional with the old ball, which his record with the old ball is better than with the new ball, which is very rare. So
yeah.
yeah, I think Cummins is a big miss, and it is definitely good news for England.
Yeah, I think Boland is an interesting one because he's almost like Hazelwood. He's like predictable in terms of what he's going to do, but he doesn't have Hazelwood's pace. And I think that's where even when England came to India, although didn't have a successful series, but there were many moments in that series where they were really able to push the likes of Ashwin and Jadeja. And the main reason for that was because they knew what was coming. Like they knew the lines, Jadeja bowls, the pace Jadeja bowls, same thing with Ashwin. They could understand what's going to come, and that's where you saw like reverse sweeps and variety of shots coming. The risk taking was there's plenty of risk taking to make sure that they can undo the strengths of these bowlers. And I think that's exactly what they'll do with Boland because of that lack of extra pace. They'll be able to try something different, whether it's going down the track, whether it's making room, whatever it might be. I think that is where Boland will struggle a little bit against an informed batting lineup who are not shy of taking risks, which they can't do as much with Pat Cummins and the variety that he has.
I'm also curious to hear your guys' thoughts on what Michael Vaughan said recently. A couple of things stood out for me. He said that, first of all, England will take a two-all score line, and the other was that Ben Stokes will probably become the most valuable bowler for England. Ben, do you agree with that? And do you see any other bowler for England being critical to their chances?
I kind of I kind of disagree with both of those things actually, and it's not the first time I disagree with Michael Vaughan. He does tend to come out with some interesting opinions, but I think firstly, would we be happy with 2-all? I mean, obviously 2-all would be better than getting thrashed, but I don't think we'll be happy with anything other than a win.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't agree with that. And Stokes being the most important bowler, I think Stokes may be the most important player given his dual role with bat and ball and as captain. But whether he's the most important bowler, I don't know. I think Archer and Wood with their pace could probably be, and I think Archer in particular could be the key man. And the other one I think would be really good on kind of modern Australian pitches which offer quite a lot of movement is Gus Atkinson.
Right.
So I think Stokes is phenomenal. I hope somebody stops him from bowling 12 over spells and breaking himself. But the most important bowler, I'm not sure about that.
Mike, given the recent series, the Anderson Tendulkar Trophy, given what you saw of England's bowling in that series, do you do you have any thoughts on what are their best chances from a bowling perspective?
I mean, I agree with Ben, but the other aspect that we have to remember is Australia in recent years, especially the series against India at the end of last Australian summer, was where they produced some of the most bowling friendly pitches in their history. Like Sydney, which
Yeah.
is always flat, was green throughout the 4 days. So I think if they continue doing that, it really plays into the in English hands because we saw that in Perth when India bundled them out for I think it was like 105 or something like that. They produced wickets which are so friendly that of course, Jasprit Bumrah was going to take wickets. I don't think anybody was surprised by that. But even somebody like Harshit Rana was, unplayable, despite making his debut in that test. So I think it really does matter on where Australia goes with the wickets, with the pitches. I would be surprised if they have all five as really seeming friendly wickets, because I think in that case you will have of course, the likes of Wood and Archer, who will use their pace, who will hit the deck hard, but then you'll bring, the other skills into play with Atkinson and Stokes, who will move the ball. So I think that would make it definitely harder, especially considering the top order of Australia has been struggling a little bit. So I do think the pitches will matter. I expect maybe a couple of really green wickets, but maybe not all five. So we'll see how that goes, but that's at least my thought. And Perth, I would not be surprised if that is a green wicket. That was certainly very, very bowler friendly when India visited. And England have never actually played at the Optus Stadium. So
Hmm.
that's also going to be new for them. I think they've only played at the Wacker, which was a while ago. So that's a new stadium for them. And Yeah, so I do think that first test is going to be England's best chance. As Ben said, they traveled really well in the first away test of a series. At the same time, it's supposed to be bowler friendly, so that would be their best chance with Pat Cummins out to really reduce the difference between the two bowling attacks, and get a good first innings score and win the game. I think other than that, if they end up seeing a lot of flatter wickets or wickets that become flat after a day or so, then yes, unfortunately, you'll see a lot of dependence on Ben Stokes. Like that is just the truth of it, because somebody like Wood or Archer, the pace that they bowl, the intensity with which they bowl, for them to last 4 out of 5 tests, they'll have to bowl in short spells. So they'll leave a lot of work for Ben Stokes to do.
Right.
And of course, Shoaib Bashir comes in there. We saw, I think, I don't remember how many overs Lathan Land bowled, but it was something like 160, 170 overs across 5 tests, which is nothing, which is he barely bowled against India last summer. So that tells me that if wickets are that green, then Bashir is really not having a role. At that point, England might be better off just dropping him and going without a spinner.
I can see us playing four seamers and no spinner, particularly if there's any doubt over how much Stokes can bowl.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
think,
I just have Root bowl some spin for variety and then just use pacers.
and Bethel potentially as well.
Yes, and Bethel too.
Yeah, I
Um,
totally agree with what you just said, Mike, about the pitches. I think, where England have struggled in the past is taking wickets with the kookaburra on flat decks, whereas Australia attack have been really good at that. So if Australia produce green seamers throughout the series, they'll be playing into England's hands, I think.
And it's funny because I know Rob Key tried kookaburras in English County, and that did not go very well either.
Didn't go so well at
So
all.
On the batting front, there's been a lot of chatter about one player in particular, uh, Joe Root. Everyone seems to have an opinion on, on Root and his performance in Australia, given that his stature and track record overall in international cricket. I don't think anybody questions he's one of the best, if not the best batter in international cricket today, or at least in tests. So what do you make of his struggles in Australia? Like, why hasn't he been able to crack that code?
I think his lack of 100 in Australia is a little bit overplayed by it's a good media story.
Right.
But he averages 36 in Australia, which given every tour he's been on has been a complete disaster. Averaging 36 is not terrible. And yeah, just don't have any concerns about Root's ability to bat in Australian conditions. I think he'll be fine. And I think he will make 100. I think Matthew Hayden made an interesting promise that if he didn't make 100, he would run naked around the SCG or something, didn't he? So I think everyone's probably hoping
That's a
that
lot of pressure to put on
everyone's
Joe
hoping that
Root.
Root makes the 100 early doors.
Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, I do think like the form that he's in, I think he's taken his game to another level. I mean, he was already elite batter, but last couple of years he's taken it to another level in terms of, also scoring at a much more brisk rate, taking more chances, and still having the output that he's always had. So yeah, I do think like it's about time that he's going to have that successful, like really successful Australian tour. There's a lot of others who are players like Jacob Bethel who are touring for the first time, so it'll be important for Joru to play that anchor who around which the England team can step up and perform. Yeah, I do think I like the English batting way more than I like the Australian batting right now, but
Hmm.
that's of course it's a long series, things can change. We saw even in the last Ashes in England that Australia started really well. They were 2-0 up and then almost lost 3-2 if not for the weather interrupting. So I do think these things change quite a bit in series as long as these. But yeah, I do hope that Joe Root starts well, because if he does, and to my point earlier, they travel well in the first game. If they win that one early, I think we're going to have an amazing series rather than one of those one-sided ones where things just don't fall into place and then Australia walk all over them.
we can't do an entire episode on the Ashes and not mention baseball. It's been years since this term has been coined, and I feel like every series that England plays, it's almost like we have to talk about it. But I'm just curious, there doesn't seem to be that much chatter about it anymore. Do you think we've kind of passed that phase of, basketball this, basketball that, and just accepted that England just play, just they follow Brendan McCullum's philosophy of just bat hard and fast and not make it like it's just the most unique thing in the world?
I think everyone's used to it by now, aren't they? It's probably worth noting that the England team don't use the phrase "basball," and they actually McCullum doesn't like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think everyone's just used to that style of cricket now. I think there's been some fundamental misunderstandings about what it is, and people think it's just kind of trying to score a very quick run rate. But I think it goes a lot deeper than that, and a lot of it's on the bowling side. It's trying to trying to take wickets at all costs and being prepared to go at higher economy rates. It's setting attacking fields. It's about taking the positive option
Right.
where possible and transferring pressure back onto the opposition where possible. And I think and that's just the way they play, and it's kind of ingrained. And they've picked players that they know can play that way. And yeah, hopefully they actually get some results with it, because there've been some near misses with obviously 2-2 in England last time, and 2-2 against India last time. And so yeah, it's about time we won a series
Right.
against top tier opposition using these methods. Otherwise, I think it might be consigned to the history books and
Yeah.
try something else. I do think they've also toned it down, like you saw against India in the summer.
Yep.
They definitely played
They adapted.
in a
Yep.
slightly more circumspect way, where when the conditions and the match situation dictated that they needed to dig in, they did so in a way that I haven't seen them do before. And so I think maybe this is kind of, Bazball 2.0, and
Yeah.
they've kind of adapted it, and hopefully it comes off this winter.
Um, let's end this episode by, just we'll actually talk about our predictions for this as well. But, you know, Ash's banter are just part of the whole deal. From ex-players to current players to commentators, everyone has very strong opinions. It's never measured or very diplomatic when it comes to Ashes. Um, Stuart Broad said this was the weakest Australian team since 2010. Warner and McGrath have predicted an easy win for Australia, which they always do against any opposition anyway. I'm just curious to hear what's your take on all of the banter and you know, yeah, just what do you think about the banter game so far? Has it been weak? Has it been like, the usual standard?
I think it's the same every time. It's the usual suspects predicting 5-0s, etc. And it's all good fun, but it does start to grate on me a bit, especially when it
Yeah.
starts so far out. Especially David Warner, who's an abrasive character. Perhaps abrasive's the wrong choice of word there, given the history. But uh, he's one of the people who keeps coming out with this moral victory line, and that just really
Yes.
annoys me, because it's just like it was a throwaway comment in response to a journalist saying to Harry Brook, if they win at the Oval after rain had denied them at Old Trafford, if they win at the Oval, could that be considered a moral victory? And Brooke said, yes, perhaps it could. And now every single social media post, every interview, whatever it is just kind of littered with Australians using the phrase moral victory. And that's just
Right.
too
Right.
much.
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Ben. It does get it's fun when it's like 3 months away from the Ashes. I do enjoy like randomly seeing Broad making random statements like that and laugh about it. But as the series gets closer, obviously everybody knows it's time for business and all of this gets in the past. So yeah, it's always fun, but yeah, I do always find it really funny with Glenn McGrath in particular because I have never seen him predict anything other than 5-0, no matter the
Right.
opposition. So it's really funny. I just think he belonged to a team with Shane Warne where they just did not lose, and so that's all he can think about. Which is really funny because I would think when you're not in the middle of it, you would learn to be a little more objective, but apparently that's not his strength.
Speaking of which, Stuart Broad and David Warner are, no longer playing for their respective teams. And I think that's just sad because, for all their cricketing skills, I think what the extra factor that they brought was just their ability to annoy the opposition and the opposition fans. And so I wonder who's going to take their place. Like, is it going to be Harry Brooks himself for England and for Australia? I don't know. I don't even know if there's a good replacement for David Warner and the annoyability factor. Um,
Marnus does a good job.
Travis Head, maybe.
yes, Martin is just more behavioral. I think the behavior is what irks, his quirks and his mannerisms is what. But in terms of just saying stuff that just like riles up, the opposition players and fans, we need new replacements. But we'll see. We'll see. Every Ashes brings some new story, new characters to the forefront. So I'm sure this Ashes is not going to be any different in that regard. But just as we predicted for the Women's World Cup, what are you guys' prediction for the final score line?
I think it's going to be closer than people expect. It's obviously really tough to win in Australia, but England have got their best team over there, and the best team they've had in a while, and their style of play means they won't be intimidated, which I think that's half the battle going to Australia. And conversely, Australia have got their worst batting lineup in years, and Khawaja and Constas aren't exactly Hayden and Langer. Um, a lot depends on how many tests Cummins can play, I think, and any injuries to any of the other quicks, and they're starting to scrape the barrel a bit, I think. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go with 3-2, but I'm not sure which way. But as you said earlier, I hope England win the first. If England win the first test, that'll set the series up perfectly, and it will be a cracker. I think if Australia win the first test, then there's a danger that it slips away quite quickly. But yeah,
Uh,
I'll
I'm
be
gonna
overall can't wait. I'll be nocturnal for most of the winter and hopefully won't be sitting on my sofa with my head in my hands crying like normal. So
I'm gonna go with 3-1 to Australia, but as I said, I think if the pitches are bowler friendly, I think it'll be 2-2, could be 3-2 to England. But yeah, I do think it's gonna be 3-1 to Australia. I think they still have just enough, assuming injuries and all of that fall in place, or fitness falls in place rather.
I could see a 2-all score line. I just don't think England are good enough to force an outright series win. And Australia, even with a slight edge, I think they're going to come up against, an inspirational Stokes performance or someone else just, delivering a once in a lifetime performance. So I think this is going to end up in a drawn series, which I just feel like would automatically lend itself to a classic contest. Um, but all right, gentlemen, well, thank you so much for your time. And I think we still have plenty more time down the road to talk about the Ashes and even as it's going on and after it ends. But I know that everyone's immediate attention is going to be on the aftermath of the Women's World Cup because, again, as I've said before, by the time you guys are listening to this, we'll know who's won the World Cup. And for us, in a few hours, we're going to tune in and see what's going to happen. But till then, once again, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
pleasure as always. Nice to see you both.
Yes, and Mike, same to you as well. Thanks for joining in on the call. Um, to our listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.